Hi, my name is Haley. My parents left me at a gas station in the middle of a snowstorm. Just drove off and said, "Let's see how she makes it back." They said it like a joke, like I was an inconvenience they were finally done carrying. But what came after, that was worse. They rewrote the story, told people I walked out. They held family meetings without me, moved my name off legal papers, and offered me money to disappear. And then, I found the letter. What did my grandmother know that they didn't want me to see? Why did they try so hard to erase me? The snow had already started falling when we passed the turnoff to Bridger Bowl. I was in the back seat, quiet, watching the flakes gather on the edge of the window. My father's voice cut through the low hum of the heater like a blade. "She's been sulking this entire trip," he snapped. I didn't answer. Neither did my mother. She just looked straight ahead, her lips pursed like she was afraid a single breath might give something away. I could feel the tension thick in the air, familiar, bitter, and suffocating. We were less than 20 minutes from the town, but I'd been counting the seconds since we left the lodge. Then the car jerked slightly. We were pulling off into a small gas station, half lit, mostly closed, the kind of place you'd only stop at if you had no other option. My dad put the gear in park. "I need coffee," he muttered, not looking at me. "You can't wait 10 minutes?" my mom asked, finally speaking. "Go with him if you're that worried," he growled and slammed the door. She didn't move. Neither did I. A few moments later, he came back, holding nothing. "She wants to be independent so bad, let her figure it out." "What are you talking about?" I asked, sitting up. He opened the door again, not mine. He reached into the back, grabbed my duffel, and tossed it onto the snowy pavement. My mother's voice was low but sharp. "Don't do this, Roland." He leaned into the car, looked right at her, then glanced at me. "Let's see how she makes it back." And they drove off. Just like that. The red taillights disappeared into the flurry of white, and I stood there. No coat, just my hoodie, phone at 10%, and no clue how far the next town really was. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stared at the road, still processing what the hell just happened. I stepped back under the small awning near the pumps. The station was dark inside, doors locked. A closed sign flipped toward me. I tried the handle anyway. No luck. A car passed on the road, but didn't slow. I waved with both arms. Nothing. Another followed. Same result. I pulled my phone from my pocket. No bars? Of course. Snow was sticking fast, and I could already feel it seeping through the soles of my boots. My breath came in short clouds. Every part of me was shaking, not just from cold. That voice in my head, the one I'd buried over the years, came rushing back, clear as the first time I heard it. "She's always been the one making everything harder." Clarice said it at dinner once when I was 13. Camden had just gotten some school award, and I forgot to bring in the mail. That one moment stuck, not because of what she said, but how easily it rolled off her tongue. Like she believed it. Maybe she did. The storm grew meaner as the light faded. I walked down the road, hoping maybe someone would be headed the opposite direction. My phone finally buzzed weakly. Battery low, still no signal. Half a mile later, I saw a shape ahead. A metal shed next to a boarded-up visitor center. The back was covered, enough to keep out the worst of the wind. I ducked in, dropped my duffel, and slid to the ground. I didn't feel cold anymore. Just empty. Hollow. An hour passed, maybe 2. A sound broke the silence, a truck engine. Then headlights cut through the snow. A snowplow. It stopped near the shed. A man stepped out, heavy coat, salt and pepper beard, kind eyes. "You okay, ma'am?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. "My parents, they left me here." He didn't ask why, just nodded once, helped me into the truck. The heat inside nearly brought me to tears. He handed me a thermos of coffee. "Name's Darren. You can charge your phone here if you need." I plugged it in. No missed calls, no messages, nothing. As if I had vanished and no one noticed. Darren offered to drop me at a diner down the road, somewhere warm, open late, with buses that came through in the morning. "Stay as long as you need," he said, before pulling away. I sat in a booth at the far end. The waitress gave me a bowl of soup, no questions asked. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even call home. That night, in the quiet corner of a half-lit diner in Montana, I opened my notes app and started to type. My fingers moved faster than I could think. If they wanted to teach me a lesson, maybe they just did, but not the one they meant. I slept in a vinyl booth, using my duffel as a pillow. The next morning, I caught the 7:40 shuttle heading toward town. I didn't text them. I didn't beg for a ride. I watched the snowy landscape blur through the window and let it freeze every part of me that had still hoped. I didn't call them, not once. I just watched the road ahead and thought, you don't leave someone behind unless you've already erased them in your mind. The shuttle dropped me off just after dark. The snow had slowed to a steady hush, like the sky had grown tired of shouting. I walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to the house without thinking too much, my boots sinking into the slush as I passed neighbors who didn't recognize me or pretended not to. The porch light was off. I used my own key, the same one I was given years ago when they still called me part of the family without flinching. No one was home. The air inside the house felt preserved, not in a warm way, more like a museum piece, sealed off from time and memory. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to. My feet knew where not to step, which floorboard creaked, which corner of the living room always caught the cold draft. I stopped in front of the family photo that still hung by the front hallway. It had been there since Camden's graduation. I stared at it, my face half-shadowed at the far edge. I wasn't cropped out, not technically, but the composition spoke louder than scissors ever could. My old room upstairs had been transformed. Neutral bedding, a bowl of potpourri, a new lamp. "We're using it for guests now," Clarice once told me, as if the change was a matter of logistics and not erasure. My nameplate had been taken off the door. I carried my bag downstairs without making a sound. The basement was colder than I remembered. More permanent somehow. There was a cot set up with fresh sheets. Thoughtful, in the same way a hospital room is prepared for whoever shows up next. Later that evening, I heard the garage door creak open. I stayed where I was. Clarice was the first to enter. Her heels clicked against the kitchen tile above me. A moment later, the basement door opened. She didn't come down, just stood there. "You didn't call," she said flatly. "You always make things more complicated than they need to be." I looked up at her through the dim light at the stairwell. I didn't think I was part of the plan. She didn't answer, just turned and walked away like we were done. A few minutes passed before Roland came in. He stepped down one stair, just enough to look at me. "So you're back," he said, like I'd gone to the corner store and taken my sweet time. "Did you get everything out of your system? Not one question about the weather, or how I got home, or if I was okay." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I had nothing left to say that they were capable of hearing. He huffed through his nose and left without another word. It hit me right then. The part of me that used to beg for acknowledgement. It wasn't silent anymore. It was just gone. The next morning was quieter than usual. Snow had stopped overnight, but the chill lingered. I was upstairs in the kitchen, pouring black coffee into a chipped mug, when Camden walked in. He looked at me like someone finding an unexpected item in a rental car. "Look who decided to return to civilization," he joked. "Go off the grid for a bit, huh?" Before I could reply, Clarice stepped in behind him, holding a bowl of fresh fruit like she'd picked it off a tree outside. "She stormed off in the snowstorm," she said to him, like I wasn't in the room. "Said she needed air. We waited, but she wouldn't come back." Camden's eyebrows lifted. "Wait, you didn't—" "She does this sometimes," Clarice cut in. "It's always been her way. You know, dramatic." I stood perfectly still, hands resting on the counter. My coffee cooled while they rewrote the story right in front of me. I almost laughed. Almost. But I didn't want to give them that moment. It was surreal, watching them reshape the memory before it even had time to settle. I wondered how many times they'd done it before, and how easily everyone just believed them. Drama queen. That's what I was now. They hadn't left me. I had left them. Convenient, isn't it? I walked out of the kitchen without a word. Let them have their little fable. It cost them nothing, and to argue would be to suggest I still wanted them to see me. I didn't. Not anymore. Back in the basement, I opened my journal. The one I'd stopped writing in years ago because every page felt like shouting into a vacuum. They didn't abandon me by accident, I wrote. They abandoned me by habit. The line sat on the page like a verdict. I thought of all the times I had excused their behavior. They were stressed. They didn't mean it. They were from a different generation. But what if none of that mattered? What if this was just who they were, and who I had stopped trying to be loved by? I closed the journal slowly, not with grief, but with decision. There was no need to convince them. The record was already writing itself. And for the first time, I wasn't interested in changing the script. I was just watching. I began to think, maybe it wasn't just the blizzard I needed to survive. Maybe it was them, too. The first paper I pulled was a tax record from last year. It had been stuffed behind a stack of appliance warranties and forgotten insurance pamphlets. I wasn't even looking for it. I'd opened the hallway cabinet just to grab a light bulb, but there it was. Line by line, it outlined ownership of the house. The name at the top didn't surprise me. Elvina Holloway, my grandmother. The name underneath hers did mine, listed clearly as co-owner. No mention of Clarice, none of Camden, no footnotes or disclaimers or pending reassignment notices. Just two names side by side. And yet, no one had ever mentioned it. The longer I stared at the page, the more it became clear this wasn't an oversight. It was strategy. Keep me quiet long enough, and the silence would make it easier to disappear me from everything, including the deed. I folded the paper and slipped it into a manila envelope I kept in my closet. I didn't need to wave it in their faces. Not yet. But I needed to know it existed, because one day, someone was going to say I never had a right, and I'd need proof. A few days passed. Snow began to melt, slowly. It was Saturday when the next crack came. I'd gone upstairs to make coffee, just coffee. When I entered the kitchen, they were all there. Clarice, Roland, Camden, standing around the island, talking low, clipped tones, glancing at a folder spread open between them. No one looked up. I hesitated in the doorway for just a second too long. Clarice finally turned, resting her palm over the papers, as if they were some sacred text. "This is a family meeting," she said without blinking. "We'll fill you in if anything becomes relevant to you." Camden added, not unkindly, but with that same condescension he always used when I corrected his grammar as a kid. "You probably don't need to worry about this stuff, Haley. It's all just estate logistics." They didn't even pause to see if I'd respond. So I didn't. I poured my coffee and left. That night, as the kitchen lights dimmed and everyone disappeared upstairs, I waited until the house was still. Then, I came back. The folder had been moved, but I knew exactly where Clarice would hide something important. Under the cookie tins in the second drawer, right below the fancy tablecloths we never used. I was right. The documents were neatly stacked, mostly legal drafts, notes from a financial advisor, proposals for Camden to take over management of the house. But one line near the bottom, caught my eye and stayed there. Haley Merceau, no decision necessary at this time. No decision necessary, as if I were an optional character in a play already cast. I took a photo and placed everything back exactly where I'd found it. The next morning, the air was heavy with the smell of burnt toast and Sunday tension. I sat quietly at the table, sipping coffee, while Camden helped himself to eggs. Clarice was already dressed for church, although no one had mentioned going. Owen, Camden's son, wandered in from the hallway. Still in his pajamas, He looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. "Daddy said you live down there 'cause you don't have a real job," he announced cheerfully. "Are you like the helper?" Clarice choked lightly on her tea. Camden forced a laugh. "Kids say the darndest things, huh?" "Maybe you should watch what you say around your son," I said, without raising my voice. Clarice set down her mug. "That's enough, Haley." "Is it?" I asked. The room went still. I stood and left before anyone could try to fix it with a half smile or a rushed apology. Downstairs, I opened my journal again. "They think I'm quiet because I'm unsure," I wrote. "But I'm quiet because I'm documenting." They could tell themselves I didn't understand estate logistics, that I was just a guest staying too long, that I was hard to live with, or hard to love, or hard to include. But I understood everything, every move, every omission, every polite shrug and sidestep disguised as, "We didn't mean it that way." They'd rather I disappear quietly. I think I'll stay loud in the paperwork instead. I didn't tell them I had made the call, but I did clean up the dining table with the kind of grace that makes people nervous. Later that night, I sat cross-legged on the floor of the basement with a trash bag beside me, sorting through a pile of old files Clarice had asked me to toss or shred years ago. I didn't shred them. I didn't toss them either. I kept them in a box marked miscellaneous, a label vague enough to be ignored. Near the bottom of that box, wedged between outdated phone bills and brochures for assisted living facilities, was a file labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. 2019. Hold, HL. My hands stilled. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. The first was a property tax notice from just before Elvina died. Her name sat at the top, bold and centered. Right beneath hers, smaller but still legible, was mine. Not Camden's, not Clarice's, mine. The second page was a ledger. It confirmed what the tax record hinted at. Elvina had co-signed the deed with me the year she got sick. A way to secure her wishes, she'd once said. I'd forgotten that moment. She'd signed forms while I brought her tea and helped her into bed. Back then, I thought it was just about logistics, avoiding probate. I didn't realize it was a statement. The third page was a typed note, never mailed, but printed and paper-clipped. The top was titled, Pending Reassignment, Estate Reallocation, HM. I sat there for several minutes, reading the word pending, like it was a scar I hadn't noticed until now. So they knew. They all knew. Clarice, Camden, Roland. They didn't need to cut me out completely. They just needed to stall long enough until I either left on my own or gave up trying to belong. The next morning, the house buzzed with the sound of preparations for Sunday brunch. Clarice moved through the kitchen like she was hosting a presidential fundraiser. Camden and his wife showed up with their son, Owen, who ran circles around the kitchen island like a kid hopped up on orange juice and approval. I tried to blend in, as usual. No one asked where I'd been. No one asked what I'd been doing. Just before we sat down, Owen wandered over to where I was standing by the fridge. He looked up at me and said, in the most matter-of-fact tone I've ever heard from a child, "Daddy said you live in the basement 'cause you didn't make it. Are you a tenant?" I didn't flinch, not even a blink. Clarice snapped her fingers. "Owen, that's not appropriate." He looked confused. "But that's what Daddy said." Camden smiled awkwardly and scratched the back of his neck. "You know kids. They repeat everything." I set my coffee cup on the counter with care, like any sudden movement might shatter the last of my patience. "I'm not a tenant," I said calmly. "I'm family. At least, I used to be." Owen stared, then ran off to find something less confusing. No one said anything after that. Not to me. Not about me. That night, I laid the documents from the folder across my bed like puzzle pieces, slowly aligning the edges, checking signatures, photocopying everything twice. Then I pulled out my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. Daniel Green, an estate paralegal I'd met while volunteering at a senior outreach clinic. "Hi, it's Haley Merceau," I said when he picked up. "I need to talk to someone who understands what's legal and what's just conveniently misunderstood. There was a pause. Then his voice came back, gentle but alert. What kind of documents are we talking about? Deed, tax, a co-ownership ledger, maybe a few passive-aggressive attempts at erasure. Send me everything, he said. We'll sort it. I hung up, saved the scans, and emailed him within the hour. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. There would be no shouting match, no confrontation around the kitchen table, no demand for apologies that would never come. There would be a record. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, refilled the coffee pot, and folded laundry at the table, while Clarice and Camden discussed someone's retirement party. They didn't ask me anything. They didn't notice anything. But I was watching. When I sat back down in my room that night, I wrote one final sentence in my journal for the day. They didn't just forget me in a snowstorm. They hoped I'd forget myself too. But I didn't. And now I had their paper trail. The only thing colder than that blizzard was the ledger that proved I never stopped being an owner. Only they stopped acknowledging it. Which is exactly why, the next morning, I requested a legal consultation and submitted the first form with my name on it. The printer still whirred behind me when I stepped away from the desk. My coffee had gone cold. I walked to the utility closet under the stairs, thinking I might find an extension cord for the old scanner I'd dragged up from storage. The closet was a graveyard of holiday decorations and forgotten tools, stacked in uneven piles that smelled faintly of dust and cinnamon. While shifting a cracked plastic bin labeled Xmas 2016, a bundle of brittle papers slipped out from behind the shelf. One yellowed envelope slid free, nearly invisible against the floor. I picked it up, and my breath caught before I even read it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Cursive that curved gently, every Y, curled in a way only Elvina ever did. For Haley, if they never give this to you, I hope you find it yourself. The ink had faded, but the words hit sharp. I sank down onto the bottom stair, held the envelope between both hands, and slid my thumb under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No date, no greeting. This house is yours, Haley, not because you're the youngest, because you were the only one who stayed when I couldn't walk. You didn't need to be told. You just showed up, quiet, steady. I watched it all, even when they told you it didn't matter. Clarice made me feel like I was a burden. But you carried that burden quietly and with love. My hands started to tremble. Not out of surprise, but because I wasn't sure what to do with this kind of honesty after so much spin. I read it 3 times before standing. That evening, after dinner plates were cleared and Roland retreated to his usual silence behind the newspaper, I set the letter on the kitchen island and stood there, waiting. Clarice came in from the pantry, paused mid-step when she saw the paper. She picked it up like it was junk mail, barely glanced at the writing. "That was a draft," she said. Her tone was flat, practiced. She didn't understand the legal side of things. I didn't respond right away. "Let's not pretend you earned anything," she added. "Everything you have is because of us." There it was, the family gospel, the rewrite of every version of every event, always ending in their generosity and my deficiency. "You didn't even give me her words," I said, "and now I have to decide what to do with them." She didn't blink. A moment later, Camden walked in, holding a plate of leftovers. Clarice handed him the letter like it was a receipt. "She's trying to stir up the past," she said. Camden scanned the page, then shrugged. "This doesn't change anything legally." I took the paper back, folded it gently, and walked out. They didn't follow me. Of course they didn't. Their silence wasn't new. It was just louder now. Back in the basement, I set the letter beside the photocopied deed and tax documents. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer surprised me. They had erased Elvina's voice from the record. They tried to erase mine, too. I sat at my desk, turned on the small lamp I kept there, and opened my journal again. "They think I want a reward," I wrote. "But I'm not here to collect. I'm here to correct." I paused. I'm not trying to stir the past. I'm trying to exhume what they buried. And now that it was in the open, now that I held both the proof and the decision, I knew exactly what came next. 2 days later, just before noon, I walked through the doors of the local legal aid office, wearing a coat that no longer fit and a face that didn't flinch. The receptionist, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s, greeted me with the kind of warmth reserved for people who look like they have nothing left to prove. "I have an appointment with Daniel Green," I said. She nodded. "He's just finishing up with someone. You can take a seat." I sat down, clutching the folder in my lap like it contained more than documents. Maybe it did. Maybe it carried the last few pieces of myself I hadn't handed over or hidden for someone else's comfort. When Daniel called me back, he didn't waste time with small talk. That was one of the reasons I chose him. He closed the door gently behind us and gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Let's see what you've got," he said. I laid everything out. Deed copies, property tax records, the scanned letter from Elvina, even the draft from Clarice with the false inheritance breakdown. He read in silence. Occasionally, he scribbled a note or made a low sound in his throat. When he looked up, his expression was all business. "You have a legitimate claim, Haley. Strong, actually. Given the timeline and the way your name appears on those early filings, it would be very hard for them to argue you weren't meant to be included." "Even if they try?" "They'll try. But the burden of proof is no longer on you." I nodded once and reached for the pen. I signed the initial filing to initiate ownership clarification and request mediation. No tears, no shaking hands, just ink on paper, like I'd been doing this my whole life. That evening, I was folding towels at the dining table when Clarice found the envelope in the day's mail. I heard the change in her breath before I saw her. She walked into the kitchen slowly, as if careful movements might calm what was already unraveling. "What is this?" she asked, holding up the letter like it was radioactive. I didn't stop folding. The beginning. Camden walked in behind her, pulling the paper from her hand and scanning it quickly. "She actually did it," he muttered. "She's making it official." Roland entered last, catching just enough of the scene to get irritated without context. "What's this drama now?" Clarice turned to him, her voice shaking, though she tried to mask it with control. "She's filing for part of the house. She's trying to take it." I looked at all of them for the first time that day. I wasn't smug. I wasn't gloating. I was finished being quiet. "You made the decisions," I said. "I'm just putting them on paper." No one spoke. Clarice's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Roland grumbled something about betrayal under his breath and left the room. That night, long after the house settled into its usual artificial calm, there was a knock at my basement door. It was soft but deliberate. I opened it to find Clarice standing there, holding a manila envelope. She stepped in without waiting for permission, the way people do when they're used to being obeyed. "This is a release form," she said. "If you sign it, we'll give you $25,000. You walk away, no more legal nonsense. Everyone wins." I didn't even glance at the paper. "You mean everyone gets to pretend I was never part of it?" She didn't flinch. That's not how I'd phrase it, but yes. The honesty, for once, was almost refreshing. I took the envelope, closed it without reading, and set it aside. "I won't be bought," I said quietly. "Not this time. You'll regret this," she warned. "No. I regret not doing it sooner." Clarice left without another word. I stood in the silence for a long time after the door clicked shut. It wasn't peace, but it was something closer to it than I'd had in years. I opened my journal that night, letting the weight of everything settle into words. They think erasing me is cheaper than facing me, but they don't realize I cost more now. And I do. Not because of what I demand, but because of what I've learned to no longer tolerate. I didn't raise my voice. I just raised the paperwork. The air in the house had shifted. Not by much, just enough to notice, like the pressure dropped an inch or two and never came back up. The next evening, I was in my room sorting papers when I heard footsteps creaking slowly down the stairs. Not the kind of hurried steps you take when you're about to shout. These were careful, rehearsed. A knock followed. It was soft, but not timid. I opened the door to find Camden standing there with one hand in his pocket and the other holding a folded check. "No strings attached," he said. "Mom and Dad figured this might help. Smooth things over." He handed it to me without making eye contact. I unfolded it. $35,000. No explanation, no cover letter, just a name, an amount, and a signature. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch until he finally looked up. Is this a thank you gift for keeping my mouth shut, or just another attempt to write me out of the story? Camden gave a half smile, the kind you give when you're trying to act like the adult in the room. You know how this works. Let's all end it gracefully. I held the check between my fingers like it might burn. Gracefully, I repeated. That's the word you're going with. He shrugged. What else is there? Do you really want this to go all the way? I didn't start it, Camden. I'm just choosing not to disappear. He didn't argue. He just turned and walked back upstairs, quiet as he came. After he left, I didn't tear the check. I didn't keep it either. I slid it into the envelope Clarice had given me earlier and tucked both into a drawer. Not because I was undecided, but because I knew they'd ask if I had it. Later that night, I returned to something I'd nearly forgotten about. A month ago, during Sunday brunch, Clarice had left a folder of estate papers on the kitchen counter while she stepped out to take a call. I'd taken pictures, just 3 quick snapshots of pages that looked heavy. I hadn't revisited them. Until now. I pulled up the images on my phone and zoomed in on the second page. There it was. Primary beneficiary, Camden Vexley executor. Clarice Vexley, secondary designation, non-priority. Haley Merceau, listed for legal balance. Like I was a box to check, a technicality. So they had it all planned. Even the illusion of inclusion was curated, kept just within the boundaries of plausible fairness. On paper, I existed, but only as long as it didn't interfere with the real agenda. I printed the images, put them with the letter from Elvina, with the co-deed, with the timeline, with the tax slips. The file was thick now, and I wasn't hiding it anymore. The next morning, I waited until Roland had finished his breakfast, until Camden was back from his jog, and until Clarice had returned from the dry cleaners. I walked into the living room with a folder under my arm, and my lawyer, Daniel, on speakerphone. They were seated, scattered in different corners, like witnesses trying not to make eye contact. I laid the printed summary on the coffee table without ceremony. You have 10 business days to submit your counter, I said evenly. After that, the sale proceeds. No yelling, no insults, just the facts. Clarice stared at me, frozen. Roland opened his mouth, then closed it like he'd lost the sentence. Camden stood up slowly and left the room. I didn't chase anyone. I didn't stay for their reaction. I returned to my room and wrote, They underestimated the kind of woman silence grows into. I'm not angry. I'm just no longer available for erasure. Let them sit with that. Because they built a life pretending I was fragile. I'm building one, proving I'm finished pretending. I wasn't running away. I was choosing the door they always swore didn't exist. The following afternoon, I heard the mailbox flap clang shut as the postal truck pulled away. I waited a few minutes before stepping out. It was cold, but the wind had calmed. The world felt paused, like it was waiting for something. Among the usual utility bills and junk mail was a small brown box. No return address, taped along the edges with a kind of care that felt oddly familiar. It was light, but not empty. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in a faded dish towel, was a mini DV camcorder. My heart stuttered. There was a worn label across the top. For Haley, private. I hadn't seen that camcorder in over a decade. Elvina used it to record our birthdays when we were kids. Mine always filmed in one take, Camden's edited like a campaign ad. No note, no instruction, just the camera. I didn't hesitate. I found an adapter in my box of cords, plugged it into the old TV I kept in my room, and hit play. The screen flickered before settling on Elvina's face. She was thinner than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes were as steady as ever. "If you're watching this, Haley," she began, "then it means they tried to hide it. Or maybe they just forgot to finish the job." She smiled, tired but knowing. This house, this story, wasn't built to trap you. It was built to last past them. People who need credit, who hoard power, who rewrite what's true. You are not fragile. You are not the footnote. You're the keeper. She paused, as if measuring whether I was still listening. You carried me, Haley. When I couldn't stand, when no one else wanted to touch the responsibility. You did it without a parade. I saw it. Every bit of it. Her voice cracked. They act like memory is a matter of who talks louder. But I left this for you. Not because you need it, but because it's yours. The truth is yours. I didn't cry right away. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, the weight of every unspoken moment tightening in my chest. By the time the video faded to black, I was shaking, but not from sadness, from recognition. I spent the next hour copying the footage to a USB drive. I didn't bother editing or adding context. That night, just after dinner, I composed an email. To Clarice.Vexley. Subject, proof attachment, video, final, USB. Body. I made it back. You didn't. I pressed send, closed the laptop, left the room. Upstairs, maybe 20 minutes later, I heard the laptop slam shut. Clarice's voice barked something I couldn't make out. Drawers slammed. Footsteps stormed past the stairs. I stayed where I was. She came to my door, paused. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't knock. Just stood there like she was trying to decide if I still counted as someone she could control. She walked away. Later, as I passed the hallway, I overheard her mutter it. Not to me, not even to Roland, but like a curse under her breath she couldn't swallow. I don't have a daughter like her. The words landed, not as a wound, but a confirmation. I didn't feel rejection. I felt release. She was right. I'm not her daughter. Not anymore. I never belonged to the version of family she built. A house where love came with receipts, where silence was currency, where truth had to be fought for. I walked back to my room, closed the door gently, and looked around. The house wasn't the prize. It never had been. It was just the battlefield. Being able to leave it behind on my terms, that was the victory. Early that morning, I zipped the last file folder into my shoulder bag, stood in the entryway of the house, and stared at the walls like they'd somehow speak back. But they didn't. They just stood there, quiet, over-decorated, familiar in a way that didn't belong to me anymore. An hour later, I was sitting in a real estate office with my lawyer beside me, pen in hand. The papers spread before me were neat, final. No one had filed a counterclaim. The Vexleys didn't show up. They hadn't even bothered to send an email. Daniel slid the last sheet toward me. Once you sign this, it's done. Irrevocable. I nodded, signed. Just as we finished, my phone vibrated on the table. A restricted number. I let it ring out. Back on the sidewalk outside, I checked the voicemail. It was from Mrs. Kellerman, an old friend of my mother's. Her voice was low, somewhere between pity and warning. I heard what happened. Clarice is... Well, she's saying you blindsided her. She's not doing great with it. Said you always had a flair for drama and payback. But Haley, she also said she never thought you'd actually follow through. She's rattled. I didn't save the message. Instead, I found a quiet corner at a coffee shop a block from the courthouse and ordered something I didn't need, just to hold the cup. A woman approached me as I stirred the drink. She looked older, early 70s maybe, with the kind of eyes that saw too much but softened anyway. Mrs. Fenley. The neighbor from 2 doors down, who used to sneak me warm bread when I was stuck doing yard work in the cold. "I heard about the house," she said, folding her hands on the edge of the table. "Your mother, she used to tell us you wouldn't amount to much. Said you didn't have the stomach for hard things, that Camden was the one who could carry weight." I didn't flinch. I just waited. "She was wrong," Mrs. Fenley added quietly. "And I hope, wherever she is right now, she knows it." I nodded once, not out of pride, but acknowledgement. We didn't speak again. She patted my hand and left. I didn't finish the coffee. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the house for the last time. The moving truck had already come and gone, and the only things left were the ones I hadn't wanted to take. Books that weren't mine, awards I never won, frames that never held me. I went down to the basement, not for anything in particular, just to see it one more time. In the far corner, tucked behind an old chest, was a box I hadn't seen in years. Inside it was a knit blanket, light blue, frayed along the edges. A small tag in one corner read HM, stitched in Elvina's hand. I sat there with it for a while, running the yarn between my fingers. I didn't cry. I didn't keep it either. I folded it, placed it neatly back in the box, and returned it to the corner. Some things aren't meant to follow you. Some things are just meant to remind you that you once mattered enough for someone to make them. When I locked the front door behind me for the final time, I didn't look back. That evening, I boarded a Greyhound heading west. Oregon. I'd picked the state not for any particular reason, but because I'd never been. It felt like a clean page. The bus hummed along the highway, headlights catching snow in the distance, though not like that storm. Nothing would ever be like that storm. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed one last journal entry. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I just stopped asking for a seat at the table that kept moving the chair. I read it again. Then I deleted it. Out the window, the horizon blurred as the sun dipped low behind the trees. I exhaled and let it stay out. For once, there was nothing else to carry. Maybe healing isn't about being welcomed back. Maybe it's knowing you never needed to ask again.